has been in the back of my head for a long time. That's just some things to just help us be a little bit more prepared in Math Circle. And so what I originally wanted to go for was a picture of me as a brownie. I've been a lifetime Girl Scout, and I would say that that's very much influenced some of the lessons that I've brought into Math Circle, and I wanted to share that to everyone today. The other thing that influenced it, and some of you knew this, is when I was at Circle on the Road last year, my father spiral fractured his femur at the bottom of this canyon, in the middle of nowhere. And he had every single thing in his bag he used. And so this is just for our family reinforced that you should always be prepared, because pretty much every single thing in the bag is the only reason that my father is walking today. So those of you that just knew that he had a big accident last year, my dad is doing great. This is him hiking in the mountains last year. Those aren't crutches, those are just he was hiking, so my dad is great. But it's also just led to very much a lifetime passion, a reinforcement that we always need to be prepared. We never know what's going to happen. And by thinking ahead a little bit, by having a couple of extra things with us, it's going to make the biggest difference. Now, the reality is, this is, what's going to be happening in Math Circle. Paper cuts, right? I mean, for the most part, we don't have a lot of emergency situations. But for the 1 or 2 times in all of the 100 circles that we have across the country that there is an emergency, a little pre-planning is going to go a long way. It's still going to be an emergency, but it's going to be less of a situation. It's still going to be a paper cut, but we're going to have a Band-Aid there, and you're just going to have less blood everywhere. So just by thinking ahead of a little bit, we're sort of dampening the criticality of our issues. This is a little bit of math that we're going to throw in today. So we're trying to dampen our emergencies, and by planning ahead, we can just reduce. So what I wanted to talk about today is what I put in my Math Circle box, some things to think about when working with students who happen to be minors, waivers and other paperwork, and planning for an emergency. So to start off with, I'm guessing that pretty much everyone here has, when you run a Math Circle, pretty much everything up above. You're bringing some form of writing utensil, you're bringing paper, you're bringing something to write on the board, and most likely the students will remind you that they want snacks. But a couple of the extra things that I throw in my box that makes them a little bit heavier, but I think is very much worthwhile is what I want to talk about today. So the first thing that's in there is a lesson for my back pocket. I have instructors that come to my Oakland program from Davis, and they just happen to get in a, there happens to be a traffic jam. What do you do for that extra 15 minutes while you're waiting for the instructors to show up? What do you do if the instructor, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years last week, and what happens? So just something that you carry around in your box that you can pull out, not a lesson that you did last week, something to just pull out and be like, we're going to do this today. And so I just leave Circle in a box in all of my packets, and we have the materials to do that. We also sometimes rely on our newsletter. We have a problem of the month, and that'll at least give us a warm-up problem if we're waiting for somebody that's stuck in traffic or trying to park. But just something to think about so that you don't just have a group of restless students that are getting more and more restless while you're waiting for somebody to come rushing in the door. Next thing is just in case of first aid kit. I live and breathe as a Girl Scout by SafetyWise. It used to be called Susie Safety. And they would tell you what you had to have at every single event. And so I'm going to refer to this a lot today. But it meant that I always put a first aid kit in all of my things. Most likely, we're just dealing with paper cuts. If you do this, some of the reminders that I wanted to remind you about. Don't give anyone drugs. And what I mean by that is don't give anyone Tylenol, don't give anyone Excedrin, don't give anyone, I know that these a lot of times are your friends, kids, but you just don't want the liability behind it. So I'm just sort of trying to, there's little things to think about. That when you start off with a program that it's your kids, when it starts to get bigger, you start to forget these things. So I highly recommend don't give, the Band-Aids are okay, but once, don't go past a certain point. Also, if you have a really, really large event, start to think about asking parent volunteers that happen to be medical professionals to be there as a medical professional volunteer. Someone that's there that knows, you know, a doctor or a nurse that's there just in case. So that's something that you don't have to think about. A lot of times they're already in your group and they were planning on coming, but if you have someone identified ahead of time, that you know that if you do have an emergency, you can send them to them and they can tell you whether or not they need to go to the hospital or whether or not they just need to go home. Just someone so that you have someone to refer to and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to make that decision without some information. Snacks. Probably all of you are providing snacks. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, because Josh reinforced this for me earlier this week, is that kids will eat fruits and vegetables. They really will. So that has less to do with liability, more just as a point. The less sugar, the more attention they're gonna last. Peanuts. One of the things I really wanted to talk about today was waivers, and I just want to really remind you to check your waivers and make sure that you don't have any students in your programs that have peanut allergies. Peanut allergies, if they do pop up, you need to be very careful in picking out snacks, because peanuts are in everything that you don't think about, including ice cream. Vanilla ice cream a lot of times can have peanuts in it. And so just double check that. And then the other thing, you know, I don't like to use hand sanitizer for everything in everyday life, but when you have a whole entire group of 30 kids coming from 20 different schools, bringing all of their colds from 20 different schools, I do tend to throw out hand sanitizers before we eat food. So, and if you put an adult in the front, just sort of, you know, holding it, they all know what to do. They do it all the time in school, so they'll use it. Okay, that's a lot. Yes?
How do you prepare your fruit? I mean, when I brought my grapes, I had to make sure that they're all washed and so on. I mean,
Josh.
how far do you go with those things?
So I tend to...
Oranges and bananas, they come individually wrapped.
It's for every week bananas.
And oranges.
Okay.
And how you take care of it is you just buy it from the local store, so you're like literally walking at a block. Not everyone can possibly, you know, maybe you can't do that. I just, a lot of times I try to introduce students not sort of focusing on really sugary snacks like cookies, but trying to bring in healthier foods that sometimes some of my students maybe wouldn't have access to. I get like the giant box of freeze-dried fruit from Costco, and they're just like, it tastes just like a banana. Like, it is a banana.
I just wanted to suggest on the note, grapes, like require a little thought, which I can encourage me. Boys will just like break off a bunch, but the girls are like, oh, I don't want to touch this big, you know, to break off. So sort of snipping it in advance into little, so people don't have to handle something that somebody else.
That's good. And you have to decide for yourself, individually wrapped or non-individually wrapped in a giant bowl that everyone's sticking their hands into. That just stresses me out so much, I can't think about it. And that's where the hand sanitizer comes in. Okay, so snacks is something I'm sure we could all talk about. But this is really what I wanted to focus on today. Paperwork. It is, for many of us, sort of the bane of our existence. Like, why do we have to carry around all of this stuff? Why do we have all of this? And I really want to sort of use this session to reinforce that it is useful and that it is important and it's something that we should do and keep track of. So in terms of the paperwork that I'm carrying to my session every single week, I have a new student teacher packet, meaning I have students and teachers in my sessions. And this is an information packet that every single new student and every single new teacher gets all of the information about the program. It tells them where we meet. And I know that this is intuitive if you're already at the program. But they are supposed to take it home, and with it comes the waiver form that the parents or guardian read over with them and agree that this is where they're going every single week. This is important to us because a lot of our students are coming with teachers, and we want to make sure that their parents or guardians know where they're going to the program. Another useful information thing that maybe influence a couple of your programs is we also carry W-9s, and this is for anyone that we're paying, and that way we just get rid of all of the paperwork when you see them, so you aren't trying to chase down W-9s for the next month, the email and everything like that. So I'm talking a lot. Does anyone use any other paperwork that I don't have up here? Yes.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Do you think it's important to keep the completed waivers on you at all times?
I do, and I'll talk about that next.
Okay.
So let's.
I'm
Yeah.
just going to say that my waiver form, I asked, is it okay to give your kids Tylenol and, I forget, Tylenol and something else, And I also say, is it okay to photograph? You don't have to, yes or no. And also, who has permission to pick up your kid?
And that's another important one that I wanted to talk about, yeah. So the basic gist is I think all of us probably are going to take the writing utensils and the paper and the tools to do math, but I think that there is some value in including a couple of these other things in your packets or storing them at your location so that you have these things just in case an emergency arises. So some things to think about with students when you're working with students who are minors, including, for example, who's going to pick them up. I think the best resource for this is to find a resource with people that work a lot with minors. So SafetyWise is a resource put together by Girl Scouts of America. These people have a lot of experience in regards to dealing with youth in programs outside of school with a lot of different adults. And so that's why I always go back and remind them, regardless of the fact that I grew up in their system, they have a lot of experience and a lot of, if you go to any sort of activity, if you want to go horseback riding, if you want to take and go travel 50 miles away from your regular meeting location, they have suggestions in regards to what you're going to need to do, whether it's helmets, whether it's the number of adults, whether it's how you're going to transport the students, whether it's how those students are going to stay in rooms, for example, adult to kid ratio or everything like that. It's just worth it for your particular situation to find a resource and see what some other legal representative says to do. This is sort of covering your own liability, covering yourself in terms of putting together one of these events. Because I don't want something horrible to happen. Just one second. The other resource to look at is your own university. Our university has a set waiver form that we have to use, and we have certain things that we have to do. Yes, Matthias?
We're seeing a hard copy that you have in hand. Is this one online, or do we buy this one?
SafetyWise, you can buy both online, or there's PDFs of different sections, and a lot of times if you just search, it'll pop up. So I'm not trying to, well, I do, I love this application.
What do you know about running programs in school buildings?
Again, this is where I don't even think that I'm the best resource for this. I go to my teachers and I say, we're running this program in your building, what do you need to know? And that's actually one of the things with working with minors in the school grounds is a lot of times they've already been sent waivers home that cover if we're going to stay after school and do everything like this. So I still have them sign my waiver, but they're also covered by that other waiver, double waiver. So, and a lot of times school waivers are opt-out, so if they aren't signed, then that's even better. So, one of the things I don't think that we think a lot about, but I just wanted to throw out that does come out of this particular publication, is the idea of student to adult ratios. SafetyWise suggests 2 adults in the room for every 12 kindergarten students, 21st to 3rd grade students, 25 4th to 6th grade students, 7th to 12th grade students, you can have 30. Now, actually, these numbers sort of, in some ways, I would love 2 adults for every 12 kindergartners. You just need that many to put them all in one room. But the main thing that I think a lot of us haven't thought about is the idea of 2 adults. And so what I really wanted to reinforce was the idea that we should be using the buddy system and that our kids should be using the buddy system. In terms of covering your liability, it's better to never be a single adult in a room full of kids. It's better to have another adult in the room that can justify what happened, that can say what happened. And that's a horrible, horrible way of looking at things, but that's the truth. The other way you can look at this is that it's also good to have another adult if an emergency does happen. You have 1 adult to stay with all of the kids, and you have 1 adult to go deal with the emergency. It's just nice to have 2 people in the room, 2 people, responsible adults. And especially when you're dealing with high school students, you're like, do we really need this? But it's good. It's good to have 2 responsible adult figures in the room. 2 legally responsible adult figures. And a lot of times, the older students that you get, what they always say in Girl Scouts is by the time they get in high school, the adults should really just be sitting in the back of the room, not really doing much. So, kudos really with the high school system. I'm just going to talk myself into a circle now. But the idea is just really as adults never be left alone in the room, especially never be left alone with 1 student. Always make sure that there's 2 students in the room. And one of the other things that I realized I haven't been really reinforcing in my system is when students leave the room, they really should be going in buddies. one of my teachers really got me on this. She said, we don't know who's in the men's bathroom when this kid goes to the bathroom. And again, it's a horrible way of looking at it, but we had a horrible incident a couple of weeks ago in Oakland, and she just really started to reinforce that she wants to see all of her kids leaving the room in buddies. So if they go to the restroom, they go in buddies, and then they come back and they check in with you.
That's children under a certain age. I mean, high
That's all,
schoolers.
no, we do it with our high school students too.
High schoolers.
Yep. So we work on a college campus, and it's something that she's really started to reinforce. You need to decide what's best for your particular program, and you need to decide what you're willing to do. I can also watch my students. I sort of sit in the middle of all of my classrooms, and I can watch them come and go. So I'm a little bit more lax on that than I probably should be. But I sort of feel like I can watch them go, and a minute later watch them come back. Again, you have to make that decision for your program. I'm just sort of telling you what other after-school outreach programs do. And so that's very much sticking to the buddy system. And then in terms of online student actions, I think that this is something that I just wanted to bring up, and I think it's important for us to start thinking about. Online student interactions, online interactions at all, is something that's very new to the legal world. Everyone's still sort of feeling their way out. And I think it's just something that, as we were in charge of trying to develop the National Association website, the lawyers made us a little bit more aware. There's sort of two different issues in terms of age range, but the key is it sort of builds. So there's varying degrees on being online. There's just sort of like, we have a program, contact me. This is what Girl Scouts tends to prefer. It doesn't tell a location, it doesn't tell a date and time, and that way you don't ever have to worry about some student being stopped. And that's literally how they say it. Because nobody ever knows what the information is outside of that program group. The next one is, here's the program location, here's my contact information, here's the date. This is the sort of model that I've chosen to go for our San Francisco Development program. The next one, you have online social interactions for group members, where that is done with a moderator. Meaning that you have a whole entire group, you have like a Yahoo group for your mass circle, and you have to be approved because I, as a moderator for this group, know who you are. And the last one is just open social interactions, meaning that a 13-year-old and a 30-year-old can all be interacting all at the same time, all under the name of your mass circle. And I just sort of want to raise awareness that sort of the further you go along this sort of scale, it really increases the need for a waiver. It increases the need for you to just sort of be aware that there's just more and more legalese, there's more and more legal situation the further you go along here. Also be aware that that's something that under 13 is one set of rules, and between 18 and 13 is a different set of rules. So depending on what target age range of your students, it creates a different situation. Yes?
Do you mean federal law or?
That's the sort of the problem. Each state is having to deal with this differently. There isn't a federal law that covers everything, but most of the way, this is what we understand from the lawyers that we talked to. But most of the states are using California-based law right now. In California-based law, it's 13 and 18 are your two breaking points.
What are the differences?
So for under 13, they can't have any social interaction without the waiver, I believe. And 18, it depends on the type of social interaction in terms of whether or not they can just say that my parent approves me to be on here by clicking a box online. But for under 13, you definitely need a physical waiver that has been signed and faxed or mailed to you. Which sort of shocked us. We had no idea. So I just want to share that with you.
What do you mean by online interaction? If I send an email to my student who is under 13, is it counted as social interaction?
I don't believe so, no. But if you're a student, if you had a forum and this is a problem and we want to take and start answering the questions back and forth and someone can contact your student individually, that's when it starts to be really big problems. Somebody could say, yeah, yes?
And we do not contact any student by email without permission from the parent directly, or we copy the parent. And we never allow any last name of a student to be posted on the internet. We're in an open forum. No last names.
And
Fair
Or
amount.
problem solvers, they don't want students
Phantom.
using their own names.
And I hadn't thought about that. Whenever I contact my students, I blind carbon copy, so none of my students have anyone else's. So like nobody sees anybody else's email address. It only ever comes from me. I hadn't thought about the fact I do that. Yes.
In the name of the law, you should probably give for people who want to look it up for themselves. It's the COPPA, C-O-P-P-A, which I think is a horrible acronym for something like Child Online Predator Protection Act or something like that. Anyway, that will tell you exactly what you need to put on a waiver if you want somebody who's under 13 to be able to register for your website or whatever.
So I think this is something that we need to come back to, and it's something that's going to keep developing every year as social media and everything keeps changing. But I think it's something that you need to be aware of, because I've seen a lot of groups. I mean, it's a great idea as a way to get a hold of students, but I think you just need to be aware of the liability aspects of it. Such a naysayer at the end of the day. I'm sorry. So waivers and other paperwork. We've been talking a lot about this. I threw my waivers out on your tables so that you can refer to them. I think you actually have the San Francisco one, not the Oakland one. And I claim that a waiver is useful for two things. There's the liability information, but there's also useful program information. And I think that is, and so my original thoughts was that I would have each group sort of start to break it apart and we could look at what's useful, but I think that we're all tired, so I'm just going to keep going. Sorry. Okay. So here, if you see my waiver, and I don't know, there's extras and I can send it to you, I can email it to you. If you look at the waivers, this is how it's set up, and I somewhat inherited it and just kept adapting it. The first sort of part says, this is what our program is. I give permission for my students to be at that location, to participate, we understand the risks, etc. And I think that part originally came from San Francisco State, and then we kept adapting it. Next, there's going to be permission for photos and other publicity usage. This is really important for your program. It's much more exciting to have pictures of students in it, pictures of students doing things for your program, and you shouldn't be publishing pictures, especially pictures that have students' faces, without this permission. Next, no, seriously, really, my student can be in this program. That's pretty much, it's all about my student being in here. But then we go down here and we include things like, this is my student's school, this is my student's grade. This is really important information, at least for my grant processes. This is all of the information, my student's email address. I don't use student email addresses until I have a signed permission waiver. And so by getting it right there, we have contact information for program reminders. I also physically mail monthly newsletters, so that's useful information to have their mailing addresses. The other part I throw over here is the emergency contact information. And down here is the peanut allergy, insulin, bee allergies. It just basically says, is there medical information that we need to know, and that it pops up there. Questions about this? Does anyone use anything else?
I
Yes.
just have a question about, do people ever get nervous about signing something that says, their child may die if they do your program, or is this just read?
Yeah, I don't know that anyone
Loss of
actually
interest
reads
in
it,
other
quite
subjects may
honestly.
occur.
We use,
It might be over math.
Yeah.
we have a waiver and health card.
Waiver, oh, okay.
And so the waiver part gets stored in a file that's not on the premises necessarily. And the health card with emergency contact information in case we cannot reach the parent, and this information, is kept on the premises.
I like it. So did you hear that? Okay, Amanda has two pieces. There's a waiver form that they use, but they also have a health card, and the health card stays where the math circle is. So that's on the premises. And that somewhat addresses my next question. Where is this waiver? Are we just, is this a nice thing that I file in my thing? And my key is that it's not. we try as much as possible to keep this on site, which means I have a giant blue bag that just moves from location to location with all of the waivers. It also is stored on Google Docs, meaning that every single instructor in our whole entire program, well, all of the people that are in charge of the program have access to the information.
So you just scan it in?
No, I have an awesome set of student assistants that type it all in.
Why do you need it on site?
Why do I need it signed?
On site.
In case something happens, you have to call a parent.
If
Or-
there's a real medical emergency, you cannot authorize treatment. Like if I'm taking the kids a couple miles to the university and I get in a car accident, I can't authorize treatment for someone else's kid without that signed thing from their parent.
And I think that was the main thing. I mean, we think a lot about this in terms of like transplanting our kids or our friends' kids, but like once you go to sort of like that next layer over, that's when a lot of this stuff you need to think about. So
Even your friends' kids.
yeah, and
That's another story.
so I talked about sort of what's in my master call box, working all the way up to waivers, and the last thing I wanted to sort of end on is what to do in an emergency. This sort of came to me when I was at Laney College, one of my locations that I meet. This popped up one day, and this is an information sheet in every single one of the rooms that we meet in. It told you what the room was and what to do in case of just a serious illness or injuring life-threatening, serious but not life-threatening, minor injury or illness, or other emergency. It told you which phone numbers to call, and at the bottom it told you like, it had like instructions on how to get to the room, and all of this wonderful information that if an emergency was to happen. And I realized that although I could probably figure it out on the fly, none of my other locations had anything like this, and it's something that if you do Girl Scout activity, you stop. Before you start using a location, you figure out where the nearest hospital is, you figure out who you're gonna, like, if you can call the police on your cell phone, or if you have to have a landline phone and things like that. And I'd never done this. And so that especially hit me when I started to look at this map. So this is my Oakland location, all of my kids that come to Laney and Patent. And if we were to have an emergency, this is where I have to get all the kids back home. So that's, yeah. And as the parent, as the adult that's in charge of all of this, you don't get to leave an emergency situation until all of those kids go back home. And so it's worth sort of thinking a little bit ahead about. It's worth thinking, and when I'm saying emergency situation, I'm saying like earthquake. And it's bad timing, unfortunately, but it's also good timing to remind us that when it happened in Japan, it happened right after school. So this would have been influencing all of our programs. And so I have to get all of those kids home. And it's worth thinking about today. It's worth thinking about with your other leadership in your program so that you know how you're going to get them home. And just you've thought about it so you aren't on the fly at that moment trying to think about these things. And so a lot of my locations, when I started to look into it, each one of my locations, the schools, the San Francisco State, Laney College, all of them had their own evacuation procedure. So it was worth, like, I didn't actually have to think about how I'm going to evacuate because they happen to be the location for the entire neighborhood to evacuate to. So they are the evacuation location. I just needed to be able to tell parents that. And something for next year that I want to include in that parent information packet that's going home with everyone is we will be evacuating to this location. So that, and you know, it's going to get lost and you're just going to have to talk about it, but at least it's a start in that direction, it's a start to have thought about it. And so, you know, a conversation to have with your parents and the teachers at the beginning of the year. I don't know. It's drastic and it's something that I wanted to think about and just sort of throw back at you. It's just, what would you do? And it's worth thinking a little bit about today. So, and that's just the key, is that by thinking a little bit about this, we are going to have emergencies or paper cuts or something happen. Something's going to happen in our master goal. Hopefully it's just going to be wonderful math thoughts. But just let's try to think a little bit more to reduce the magnitude of these issues. And thank you.
I think it's very, very much appreciated. Having run summer programs with kids and dealt with staff who had to do this, and there's always something, she's absolutely right. it's not just that, that you're prepared, but put yourself in the situation. A kid has turned his ankle, a kid is seizing, or a kid got a paper cut. If you don't have this in advance, you're panicked. So it's important to have, you know, this, you can say to yourself, this is an emergency situation, I follow these procedures, and then you can think clearly, and you're doing better for the kid.
One of the things that strikes me as I think about all of this is thinking that it also, one way to sort of minimize the amount of this that you have to do is to run your math circle as part of an entity that's handling the custodial issue. So you go to Girls Inc., they have an after-school program, and they're dealing with the, you know, all of that, and all you have to do is do your program. And so if you don't want to mess with that. Or another alternative, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about with the inner city, is have a program for the parents at the same time as the kids. And so they're there, you know, you're not worried about, you know, if anything comes up, they're, you know, on the other side of the room or right next door, so.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been running these for 3-4 years now, 5, I have no idea. It's, and I've never had an emergency. I've never had, I mean, we had, I think we were rollerblading once at Girl Scouts and had someone break an arm. I mean, so, I mean, for the most part, this stuff never happens. But one of the situations we ran into is we were Girl Scout camping and the people next to us, they had a kid fall in the fire. And we knew what to do to help the family that was messing, you know, freaking out about it. So by planning, maybe you'll help the people around you. So it's not to be doom and gloom. It's just to not even have to think about it and not have to worry about it. So thank you.